Now that you've set up the content provider, it's time to build it up further. You already know what the task data looks like, and next you'll need to tell the content provider how to access that data. Earlier, when you communicated with a provider in the quiz example app, you saw how you always needed to make data requests through a content resolver. You'd call the correct action on it and pass in the URI for the data you wanted to access. In general, URIs tell content resolvers two things. First, which provider they want to talk to, and second, what specific data is being requested. So when you build your own content provider, it's up to you to define URIs that both, first, identify your provider, and second, identify each different type of data that the provider can work with. Now for the to-do list app, we want to access two different types of data. The first is a directory of tasks, and the second are individual tasks. This way we can do things like display all of the tasks, and we can also modify a task one at a time. So we'll define URIs to distinguish between these two types of data. Now there are guidelines for how content URIs are constructed, and you've already seen a few examples of this structure. For example, you've seen that all content URIs start with a base that includes a scheme followed by an authority. Then after that is the path that indicates the specific data you're interested in. This is the portion of the URI that will help the provider select the correct data, and this is the part you'll need to define. So let's define the URI for accessing all of the task data. This directory is a SQLite table named tasks. For consistency, when you define the path for this specific URI, you should define it with the same name. And the final URI should look like this: the content scheme, authority, and then the tasks path at the end. A lot of providers will have multiple directories of data to work with, and will therefore need multiple URI paths. One example of this is the calendar content provider. The calendar content provider keeps track of events happening throughout the year. The provider works with a number of separate tables. There's a table for different calendars, a table for the events themselves, and a table to keep track of attendees, just to name a few. And it uses different URI paths to distinguish between these directories. This seems simple enough, but how should we define the URI structure for an individual item in a directory, or for maybe a smaller subset of rows in a large directory? Well, in these cases, you need to include more information in the URI itself. For example, in our tasks directory, we might want to see the data in the priority column only. Or perhaps we want to point to one row by its specific ID. If I want to look only at the priority column, I might define a URI that points to data by appending the name of the column to my path. This path, tasks/priority, has the name of the task directory and the column name priority, so it includes all of the information a content provider would need to select data from the priority column. Similarly, if I wanted to design a URI for looking at a single task, I could decide to have a URI that points to that row by appending its unique ID. This is a fairly common practice, so if I wanted to access the second task in this table, I'd append the ID 2, and my path would be tasks/2. If I wanted to access the row with ID 3, I'd use a URI like tasks/3, row 4/4, and so on. For the task content provider to respond to a single row of data like this, I'll actually want to tell it when any URI is pointing to a single task by its ID. So potentially I could define a bunch of URIs, a single URI for every row in my table. But this would quickly become pretty unmanageable. What I could do instead is define a URI for a single task using something called a wildcard character. This is the hash symbol seen here. What this hash symbol stands for is any integer number. So as long as the URI has an integer ID after its task path, it will be recognized as a URI that points to a single item. Let's look at a few more examples of URI structures that use these wildcard characters.